break down the deal and escalate it quickly. Football at 4. John McMullen on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline talks NFL and Eagles with us every day at 4 o'clock here on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him at JF McMullen. And, John, you know, it started with a combine. I like to say somebody swigging down a bottle of Belvedere. Hey, interested in Michael Bennett? And all of a sudden, here we go. Michael Bennett's in New England. I mean, I'm sure his comments this morning kind of given the indication to the Eagles he wasn't going to comply if he got tapped on the shoulder and said, we need a help.
Yeah, I obviously, and our friend Jeff Mosher first reported the Eagles shopping Michael Bennett. I don't think it had much to do with this morning. Obviously, the quotes were pretty significant. It was more of an indication he was going to get moved. I don't think, in other words, I think it was farther along than that already. And I think it harkens back, if you remember the Tampa Bay game. Some people may remember Michael yelling at Chris Wilson, the ex-defensive line coach, when he was coming off the field. People kind of forget because he was so good in the second half of the season. He was not happy early in the season because his role was very, very limited before Derek Barnett's injury. He was not a starter. He was not getting the reps he was used to when he was in Seattle, and he was a Pro Bowl player, and he was a star. Wasn't happy. And then it kind of worked out. Silver lining of the Barnett injury, the reps go up. He's forced to play. You have to play him. He dominates. He plays at a really, really high level, and he's happy. The Eagles knew it was going back to the original process with Barnett returning from the injury. And this is really talking about Josh off air. If you're talking about this trade, it doesn't make a lot of sense if you think you're a Super Bowl contender to give up. This is the kind of deal you make to get you over the hump from the Patriots' perspective. A veteran player, proven, very cost-effective, tremendously productive. So this puts a lot of pressure on Derek Barnett. The Eagles are saying, we don't want this distraction. We don't want people pointing out that, as I did early last season, Michael Bennett's a better player than Derek Barnett. He should be playing more of the reps. The Eagles, you know, you talk about this a lot with the Sixers, Mike, development of young players. You have to trust yourself. The Eagles believe Derek Barnett's going to be a star player at some point. How do you get there without reps, without playing? So this is where you might have to take a little bit of a step back at that particular position when it comes to production-wise, to take 2 steps forward. That's what the Eagles are thinking. I'm not sure I would think the same way, to be honest, because I think the window is open. I think you're trading a very productive player to another contender who just won a Super Bowl. So it's an interesting trade on.
Well, the Patriots essentially did what the Eagles did last year. They won the Super Bowl and then, you know, made a deal like this to get better. The Eagles won the Super Bowl and then traded for Bennett and essentially got better. I don't think the Patriots had to give. I mean, they essentially gave up less than what the Eagles did to get Bennett.
Yeah, the Eagles gave up Marcus Johnson, remember the receiver, in the 5th-round pick, and got Bennett in the 7th-round pick back. Interestingly, the picks this time are 2020 picks, so they're not picks this year coming up in April. It's just the way the Patriots have done business for a long time. Trey Flowers is a really, really good player. And he's going to get paid in free agency, probably upward of $15 million. So they're going to let him walk, and they're going to bring in Michael Bennett at $7 million, maybe even kick it up to make him a little bit happier to $8 million. Who knows what they'll do? And this is sort of what they've been doing for a really, really long time, making smart decisions, bringing in good veteran players. And, from a Super Bowl contender standpoint, I mean, just ask yourself the question, would you rather have Michael Bennett that you saw last year or a fifth-round pick in 2020.
Right, there's no question.
This is about Derek Barnett and their belief that he's going to be a star player as an edge rusher in this league, and they don't want any sort of anything derailing that. And if he has a bad game, what's the first thing you're going to ask? Well, why is he playing? And we just saw Michael Bennett kill it last year. Why is he playing over him? And you would have had those questions.
Well, and I mean, the Eagles apparently, to get something back, I guess, is pretty good because they were willing to cut him to get the $7.2 million off. So at that point, do you say, hey, whatever you can get? Because you had written about it this morning that his comments are going to kind of compliment. He wanted more money to the team he was going to. He said it. Hey, whoever takes me, I want more money.
Because I think people forget the Patriots wanted Michael Bennett last year. And they offered Seattle a third-round pick last year, but the Seahawks already agreed to the trade with Philadelphia and didn't renege on the offer because they felt sort of for their own business moving forward, they had to stand by the offer they agreed to, even though the Patriots tried to come in with a better offer last second. So that worked out well for the Eagles. And I do think his comments this morning, I think that's the biggest part of that. It did affect the potential compensation. Who knows? Maybe it would have been a fourth-round pick. But once you start talking about not only you're not going to accept pay cuts, but you want more money, you've seen it with Antonio Brown at a much higher level. He's impacting trade talks by the things he says, and I think that did affect things a little bit as far as compensation probably coming back to the Eagles.
Would you see a scenario now where, ironically, the replacement could be a Trey Flowers? I mean, does that they opened up some cap space, and some people say, well, you just got rid of a guy making $7 million. Flowers is going to cost more money, but would that be something where are they ready to give this to
No, this is about Derek Barnett. There's no way they're bringing in if they wanted to bring in a Trey. I mean, Trey Flowers is a high level player. If you bring him in, that's your defensive end. That's your right defensive end. Brandon's your left defensive end, and not only that, in your rotational system, what Jim Schwartz likes to run, you can't even get into that because he's at such a high level. He's such a good player, you can't take him off the field. So that would even lessen Derek Barnett's playing time even more. As I said, I think this trade has everything to do with Derek Barnett and their belief in him as a player. I do think the impact also is that Chris Long will return because he'll have a role and he wants to continue playing. And then maybe you bring in a young player, even a first-round pick, 25 overall. We've talked about it a lot. Howie Roseman has said how good the defensive line talent is in this draft. I thought they would take defensive tackle. I still think that's more likely. But now you can sort of take one or the other. You can go an edge player if one falls or a defensive tackle. But, no, they're not going to be interested in a player like Trey Flowers because that's gonna put your first round pick from just 2 years ago into irrelevancy.
Yeah. So Michael Bennett traded to the Patriots for a draft pick in the 2020 draft, not this year's draft, next year's draft. But all right. So how does that help the Eagles monetarily?
Well, it does happen. They get $7.2 million in cap space. So now they've got. Really, if you look at all these extensions and new deals and Jason Kelsey, Lane Johnson, et cetera, now Tim Jernigan and Michael Bennett created about $27 million in cap space. So now they can do a number of things. But as we kind of talked about yesterday, I think everybody sort of always thinks about high-level players. You just mentioned Flowers. Obviously everyone has been talking about Le'Veon Bell. I think this has all been done with a number of things in mind. I think the Eagles want to find a running back. They want to find some help at safety, perhaps a linebacker. Maybe the biggest name would be a C.J. Mosley or somebody of that nature if you're not able to come to terms with Jordan Hicks. And then also, as Howie Roseman will often point out, everything's not in a vacuum. It's also not just about 2019. It's about 2020. And the Eagles seem like they're going to kick the can. I always use that term, down the road with Carson Wentz. But they're going to have to sign him to an extension next year if they do that. So all that space is also important for next year as well, or whenever they get the deal done with Carson Wentz. So all of that comes into play. It's not just about doing one big thing. So I think people who are trying to go down that path are going down the wrong path.
John McMullen here on the Sports Bash. Don't forget, follow him at JF McMullen. A lot going on in the NFL today. NFL Network's Mike Garafolo believes the Eagles will be players for free agent Tevin Coleman. Now, we talked a little bit about that yesterday, but a lot of people know that Bell is the clear top option. You've indicated that probably not a realistic option, but we did touch on Coleman yesterday. Mark Ingram, Jay Ajayi is still there if they let him walk, or do they bring him back? But now it seems that possibly the Eagles could be involved on a guy like Tevin Coleman.
Yeah, and that's the guy who I said yesterday would be my most likely a candidate at running back. I think he's the closest thing to what they want at that second level. I think he would fit better than a Mark Ingram, a little bit more well-rounded, doesn't have a lot of tread off the tire. Talented guy at times, needs more consistency. But yeah, if you can't deal with teams like the Jets who have over $90 million in cap space, it's hard to be in the range of teams like that who can essentially bid whatever they want and overpay for Le'Veon Bell or somebody of that nature. You got to start looking for the bargains, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think Tevin Coleman would be a huge, huge upgrade, really, from what this team has had since Doug Peterson has been here. I think he would be the best running back this team has had, and that includes LeGarrette Blount and Jay Ajayi. So I think it might not be the upgrade that people want, but it would be an upgrade.
No doubt. I like Coleman. He's an interesting guy. Although he can't stay healthy, has been a big problem for him. Let's look at some of the other news going around, including Antonio Bryant, who was a Bill for about five. What did I say? Antonio Brown. I'm sorry. What did I say? Antonio Bryant? Who's he? Oh, the guy from Pitt. The hell with Pitt. Antonio Bryant. Antonio Brown. Yeah, who was a Buffalo Bill for about 30 seconds today, apparently, but wants to be the highest paid receiver in the league, although he's not going to be doing it in Buffalo.
Yeah, I don't think he was ever a Buffalo Bill. I think the Steelers wanted to send him to Buffalo, and then they kind of told Drew Rosenhaus and Antonio, and they said, we're not going to Buffalo. So, I mean, unfortunately, I tweeted, to me, the quote of the year from Jordan Matthews last year about being in Buffalo, and he and his wife call their baby a Buffalo baby because there's nothing to do in Buffalo except each other. That's what Jordan said, not me. But he did not want to go there, and he's making it very difficult for the Pittsburgh Steelers to move him. And it's not only that. I mean, I talked about it a little bit when we were discussing Bennett and the fact that he's on social media. He's dyeing his mustache. He's doing some strange things. This is not helping the Steelers move him. So I don't know what he wants, but he's not making it easy for him to get what he wants.
Yeah, it was funny. There was T-shirts already made about like him with the Buffalo Bill, and the Buffalo Bill had the blonde mustache with the blue tips on its hair. Did you see them?
I feel sorry for the Bills fans, but it's.
Well, he says he wants to be the highest paid wide receiver, and you wonder if there's a team that's willing to kind of conform to that.
Well, I think there would if you get a receiver of the production of Antonio Brown who acts like he's not insane, I think maybe he would be able to get it done. But there are some red flags by the way he's acting. And look, production-wise, he's in. You talk about Julio Jones, maybe DeAndre Hopkins, and Antonio Brown. And I would argue he's been the most productive receiver. But it's weird. I think the whole thing going on in Pittsburgh is weird because he said he wants to play. He's also not only the money, but he also said he wants to play with a contender, with a franchise-level quarterback. Mm-hmm. Well, what is Pittsburgh? You're a contender. You got a two-time Super Bowl winning quarterback. You're always in the mix with New England as the top team in that conference. I don't know. It's bizarre what has happened with both Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown in Pittsburgh.
Other moves today. How about Olivier Vernier heading to the Browns?
Yeah, that's an interesting trade because I think it does help both teams. The Browns wanted an edge rusher to pair with Myles Garrett, and that gives them that because Olivier Vernon is still productive when he's been out there. And then the Giants, as you know, have had a lot of struggles on the offensive line. Kevin Zeitler in the past has been one of the better interior blockers in this league, certainly when he was in Cincinnati. And they got Will Hernandez last year. So they're finally going in the right direction. But as I always point with the Giants, I mean, doesn't matter what you do until they make the right decision at quarterback, and they haven't done that.
Yeah, he's on the move to Cleveland. We've also got other things happening, including the Jacksonville Jaguars basically releasing their entire roster, it seemed like today.
Yeah, they had to.
We were waiting for it.
Yeah, people were joking that, maybe announce the players you haven't cut instead of the players you have. But they had to gain some space, not only for Nick Foles, but they have to do some other things as well. They had the least amount of cap space coming into this process, so they were going to have to make some significant moves. They did today, and they still have talent on that team, especially defensively. So if you saw some of the names, they can recover from that. I still think ultimately it'll be a pretty good situation for Nick because of the defense, and he'll have at least an opportunity to succeed if John DeFilippo can put together a decent system for him.
Yeah, just real quick, I mean, there was a lot of names in there, some of which are kind of interesting. You got Malik Jackson, a big name, Carlos Hyde, an interesting running back, Jeremy Purnell, a right tackle, and Tashawn Gibson, a safety, along with a couple of others. Any of those, throw, Howie Roseman get a call on any of those?
I think really Gibson and Malik Jackson, especially Gibson, because there's so many safeties on the open market, so many good safeties, high-level safeties. There's going to be some bargains after the money is given to the Earl Thomases of the world and the Landon Collins, and maybe that's a guy who would have probably gotten more in a different year where there weren't so many good safeties on the market. So maybe he's sort of that mid-level bargain pickup. And Malik Jackson as well. I mean, if you want to go interior player and you don't want to go draft, and you can get him at sort of a mid-level number, maybe $7-8 million in that range, he would be really, really helpful next to Fletcher Cox to replace what Tim Jernigan gave this team in 2017. I think he could be an interesting name. And a lot of these things, a lot of these decisions depends on the market value. And, if there is an Indianapolis with $100 million coming in and they want a player, they're probably going to get him. But if it starts to trickle into the third and fourth and fifth day of free agency, might start getting some bargain.
John, David Irving, the talented defensive tackle for the Dallas Cowboys, says he is done with the NFL in an Instagram post, apparently while he was hanging out with Laramie Tunsil. No, he was all by himself in there. But he appeared to be smoking marijuana at the same time of this rant that he went on.
Yeah.
Said that he is done with the NFL. He said, quote, basically, guys, I quit. They want to talk about a suspension and all this other nonsense. I'm out of there. I'm done with this. It seems that it's brought up a big conversation about smoking marijuana in the NFL and whether or not they should be more lenient on this. And David Irving says he's done with the NFL. I don't know if he is or not, but he's going to probably get longer suspension than he already had.
Well, no, I don't think so, because the substance abuse penalties in the NFL are structured, so that's nothing that they can sort of play with. The personal conduct suspensions are sort of up to the commissioner, and there can be a sliding scale. But substance abuse and PEDs are structured, and that's where he is on the system. And I think if you read David Irving's comments, and I tweeted about this morning as well, it shows there's such a lack of education on the actual policy. And, the NFL's policy, he said NBA doesn't test for marijuana. Yes, they do. UFC doesn't test for marijuana. Yeah, Josh will tell you, meet Nick Diaz. There's a reason. You want to know why Matt Riddle is a star in WWE and right now, Mike? Because he had a problem with marijuana in the UFC. And he went in a different direction. So that's number one. And then the second part is, and I've said this before on the show, you got to fail a lot of tests to get to the point where you're David Irving. And there are a lot of people in the NFL that smoke marijuana and never get suspended. You never hear about it because you're only tested once a year. You're told when the test is going to be. You know when the window is. It's an IQ test. And the third part is first test, rehabilitation. Second test, fine. Third test, fine. Fourth test, that's your first suspension. And that's a 4-game suspension. Fifth test, 10-game suspension. So you have to fail at least 6 different tests to get to the point David Irving is, or the Josh Gordons of the world, or the Randy Gregory's of the world. And these are the people with significant addiction issues. And I think it's telling that David Irving, in a statement, basically admitted he has an addiction. In the past, in Players Tribune, Josh Gordon has admitted he's got significant addictions that go far beyond marijuana and has since he's been really a child. And Randy Gregory has admitted it as well. We just spent a lot of time talking about Michael Bennett. Michael Bennett has talked in public about his love of marijuana, his use of marijuana. You ever see Michael Bennett suspended? Not a dumb man. He knows how to pass an IQ test. So I think all of this, I think there's a lack of education on the testing policy of how harsh it is. It's really easy to get past, and basically it's set up for a number of reasons. One is public relations, no doubt about it. But the second is, think about it with alcohol. Alcohol is legal in our society. Now, we all know that. We all understand that for adults. But that doesn't mean you can show up to work smelling of whatever. Yeah. Vodka, gin, beer. And if you have a problem with alcohol, well, your employer is going to have an issue with it. And that's really what this policy is set up to do, is catch only habitual offenders who have a significant problem. And if you want to make an argument against it, it should really be the rehabilitation aspect. That I would agree with. I don't think it does enough to help people to have significant problems. But I find it very hard to feel sorry for people who failed drug tests 6 times. And for somebody like David Irving, who made $2.7 million last year, hey, you give me $2.7 million and say the only thing you have to do is pass a weed test, I'll pass that test.
I believe you. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. John McMullen with our football at 4, and, of course, he appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks, Mike.